From the East Texas Sports Network studios, powered by Texas Dairy Queen, a tradition of excellence, the ETSN podcast, where Clint Buckley and Mike Graham offer their, well, they just talk. But who really cares? It's what they do best. It's the lowdown on everything high school football in East Texas. And now, Clint Buckley and Mike Graham.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Week 6 edition of the ETSN.fm podcast. I'm Clint Buckley, and I'm joined as always by Mike Graham. How's it going, Mike?
Doing good. Let's call it Separation Friday. This is a big weekend.
Huge weekend. Not so much because of the amount of teams we got playing, because there are a lot of teams off, but there are some good matchups. But before we start to look ahead, we need to look back and talk about some of the things that we saw last week. And there were a lot of surprises, a lot of great games, a lot of statement wins. And it was sure telling, and we can't wait to see how these teams respond after such a big week. First things first, I guess we got to talk about what could be the game of the year so far in East Texas, the game you were at last week in Nacogdoches, the Dragons, the mighty Dragons.
This is flaming vodka!
For the second year in a row, take down their longtime nemesis Lufkin. What a game.
Yeah, no, if you remember in the last podcast we were talking about we were jealous of each other's games. Turns out I wasn't jealous of your game.
No, you shouldn't have been.
But it was a great game, and very well played. Not many mistakes. Lufkin muffed a kickoff return that Nacogdoches was able to recover to expand a 7-0 lead to 14-0, and then picked off Lufkin late, which sealed the game, a 38-35 win. Really well played. And I'm excited to see Nacogdoches this week. I think that this might be the surprise team, a team that could finish anywhere between second and fourth in the league.
My game obviously wasn't as breathtaking as yours. Game was over pretty quick. John Tyler and White House. I felt like that this game had the potential to get that way, just because. While White House had started off 3-0 and had looked pretty good, a little bit better than both you and I had expected, we weren't sure how they were going to handle a John Tyler team that has loads more experience, a little bit better at each of the key positions on the field, and that bye week sure did John Tyler a lot of good, and I think it played to their advantage having lost going into their bye week to Lee a couple of weeks before. And Gio McAllister was on the top of his game at quarterback for John Tyler. Probably the best game of his season so far. He had 5 first-half touchdown passes to 5 different receivers. And like I said, it was 38-10 at halftime. And you knew then that White House wasn't going to have the horses to make a serious run at a comeback in the second half, and they didn't. John Tyler dominated it from start to finish. And it was a convincing and telling statement type win for John Tyler, because I think a lot of people were high on them, me included, after their first 2 wins against Plano and Longview, because they looked really good in all facets of the game. And then they took a little step back the next week against their crosstown rival Tyler Lee. They came into the game ranked number 1 in the state. The expectations had rose exponentially just based off of their first 2 games of the season. And then they kind of collapsed in the second half, missed a bunch of tackles. The defense, which had been a strong point up until that game, let them down in the second half. And a lot of people were wondering, what kind of John Tyler team we were going to get at White House, a game that's been one of the most contested series, I guess, in East Texas over the last half decade. And John Tyler answered the bell for sure. So,
and you've got to look at White House and their schedule.
Yeah, it's brutal.
You don't know where that first win's going to come, but it needs to come soon.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit later. 3 other games that kind of caught our eye last weekend was Chapel Hill and Tatum. I think both of us kind of expected Tatum with the role that they had gotten off to, almost taking down Gilmer a couple of weeks back at home. And Chapel Hill has been wildly inconsistent so far this season, especially on defense. Haven't been able to stop too many teams, and their offense has turned the ball over quite a bit. But it was Chapel Hill's defense that kind of turned the tide. They had a couple of turnovers late that ended up getting them in a position to win the game, and they were able to do it there at the end. A big win for Chapel Hill going into the bye week. We were going to be facing an interesting set of circumstances had Chapel Hill not won that game, because you would have seen Chapel Hill, Kilgore, Carthage, the three best teams from that district a season ago, all enter the new district at 1-4.
Mm-hmm.
But Chapel Hill is able to get a big win over a good Tatum team before they go into their bye week, so that'll give them a lot of confidence as they begin district play next week. Along those same lines, two teams that are in those same two districts, Gladewater and Kilgore, just a weird game. Gladewater scores on safeties for their first 4 points of the game.
Back-to-back safeties.
And still, it was like 21-4.
Yeah.
Kilgore was still in control of the game. But you got to tip your hat to Gladewater, because I think a lot of people weren't sure how they were going to respond to that loss to St. Thomas More over in Shreveport, because they really had it taken to them in the second half of that game. And I'm sure a lot of people were wondering, okay, where does Gladewater go from here? Because they've got Carthage and Kilgore right after that. And you saw what they did to Carthage a couple of weeks ago, dominated it statistically. And then able to go on the road against a really good Kilgore team, a Kilgore team that's better than their 1-4 record.
No doubt.
Be able to come back from that big deficit in the second half to win that game 25-21. It's a credit to John Berry and his staff and to those players. And going to be really interesting to see how Gladewater uses their bye week and prepares for that opener against Tatum and next week. That's going to be a big one.
Yeah, it took the words right out of my mouth. Something a great team can do is win ugly. And Gladewater's able to do that. You saw that. I think through the third quarter they were trailing. They can't score anything on offense. Their first 4 points are safety points, and then all of a sudden it clicks and they get going. That's a good sign, and now they've got a bye week to learn from whatever was going wrong in that game. And I think they're a real deal kind of team.
Yeah, I do too. It'll be interesting to see how they do in that district, because this district's pretty good. If you talk about, especially at the top, you talk about Gladewater, Tatum. Even though they lost to Chapel Hill, most people expect Tatum to be a real player. Mm-hmm. And then you got Atlanta, who's, I don't know how many teams have looked better than they have.
Yeah.
Through the first 5 weeks of the season. I mean, they're rolling right now. And then the last game from last week, golly, I don't think anybody in the world saw this coming. I mean, probably not even the players on Alto. I mean, they probably went into Tenaha expecting a win, but a 72-21 win on the road against the number 3 ranked team in the state.
Shocking. And the way Tenaha plays, I mean, it's like a built-in self-defense mechanism. You're never going to get blown out because you're controlling the ball.
Yeah, Alto just, wow. I mean, that's all I have to say. I mean, you look at the numbers, and it wasn't one of those freak things where, Tenaha had a bunch of turnovers or Alto was playing with a short field the entire game. They rolled up 690 yards of offense against Tenaha, a defense that had played great, had shut down a good Brook Hill offense, had contained a really good White Oak offense. And to see what Alto was able to do against, I still think Tenaha is a great team. I still think that they're capable of making a run to the 2A Division II state championship game. Mm-hmm. But now you got to wonder, man, how good is Alto? I mean, they're 4-0. They've rolled everybody. They're averaging almost 60 a game.
Yeah, Keenan Johnson's putting up amazing numbers.
Huge numbers.
Passing and running.
Huge numbers. And that's a name that, not many people knew about before the year, because they'd had Zach Stearns the year before, or the couple of years before, and he had done some great things at quarterback. But, man, Alto is going to be fun to watch down the stretch for sure.
And now it's the ETSN Dairy Queen Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
Game of the Week. It's going to be hard for us to not pick a District 16 5A game as Game of the Week from here on out, because, man, there are going to be great matchups every week from here on out. And we've got the only one this week involving 2 1-0 teams in that district, and that's Nacogdoches at Ennis. And I tell you what, not many people gave Nacogdoches a chance against Lufkin, just based sheerly on what happened last year. I mean, that wasn't supposed to happen last year, them beating Lufkin for the first time in over 20 years, and to do it 2 years in a row. And then they're going to be facing those same doubts this week, going up to Ennis to play a team that reached the 4A Division II state semifinals a season ago, a team that really gave Aledo its only game of the year last season, and we all remember how dominant Aledo was last year, but Ennis was able to play with them for most of the game. And now is when we're going to find out, how good Nacogdoches really is.
Yeah, exactly. They've got to do what they did against Lufkin on a game-by-game basis, and this is one of the better teams in 16 5A with a lot of tradition. Sam Harrell left that program in really good shape when he left to retire due to his MS health issues. And, they dipped for a while, and now they're completely back, and they look a lot the same they did in the early part of the 2000s with a strong spread offensive attack and a solid defense. They're undersized on defense, but they're fast, decisive, and quick. They're disciplined. They're going to show Nacogdoches some things that Lufkin couldn't, especially because they've got a defensive end named James Lockhart, who's a Texas A&M commit. A lot of Nacogdoches' success last week was in their option game, but with Lockhart out there, things could change in a hurry. Yeah,
they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with him off the edge because you're right. I mean, it can work if McClellan reads the end right. The read option stuff could work, but. He's probably the best defensive end they'll play this year, and that's going to be interesting to see how Nacogdoches chooses to operate on offense. Are they going to do about the same amount of the read option stuff as they normally do, or are they going to try to change things up? One thing to keep in mind about Ennis is, they're only 2-2 coming into this game. Now, albeit those two losses were to really good programs, Mansfield, Timberview, and Denton Guyer, but last week against Jacksonville. They won, which is what was expected, but 42-24. I don't know if that's because Jacksonville is so much better than they were a season ago. I mean, they are better. I mean, they were 0-10 last year, and they've won 3 of their first 4 games, so they are better. But we'll see. We'll learn a lot, I think, about the top tier of 16-5A after your game Friday night. That's our game of the week, as we mentioned before, 7:30 kickoff from Lyon Memorial Stadium in Ennis. Mike, you'll be there, getting to cover Nacogdoches for the second week in a row. That'll be fun. Now, shifting gears to one of the other big matchups in 16-5A this week is White House and Lufkin. This is a big game for each. The loser obviously goes to 0-2, and that's not a spot that any team in this district wants to be.
No.
Because, it's going to be hard to make up ground when you've got, JT, Nacogdoches, Ennis, all still left on your schedule. So it's important. It's huge. 0-1 versus 0-1, people say, well, what's a big deal about that? Well, not only is the loser going to go 0-2, but both White House and Lufkin have huge games the next week. So you're potentially looking at an 0-3 start for whoever loses this game Friday because White House has Ennis and Lufkin travels to John Tyler. So this is a big game. I hate to call anything in week 2 of district a must win, but if White House and Lufkin, if White House or Lufkin are 0-2, it's going to be hard to imagine them being able to recover from that. And I hate saying that because, we had so much high expectations of Lufkin. We've both seen them. We know what they're capable of doing. Now's when they have to do it.
Yeah, it's go time for them. And something funny about this district is that there seem to be, on every team's schedule, there are 2 waves of tough opponents. You've got Nacogdoches and Ennis on one side, and then you've got John Tyler and the rest of the pack on the other half. But in the middle, it seems like everyone's got Corsicana and Lindale in back-to-back weeks, and those teams are good teams, but they're the only teams in the league right now with losing records.
Right.
So I think there might be some room to recover with those teams if you can win out on the next wave of tough opponents after them.
Yeah. I would venture to guess that, Lufkin's is a favorite. They should be considered the favorite. They're at home. They're a program that typically doesn't lose back-to-back games, especially in district, although last season they began district 0-2. Of course, they were playing A&M Consolidated in the Woodlands, which is not all that much different from what you got going on in 16-5A with the amount of talent that these teams have in this district. So,
and Lufkin did not play a bad game against Nacogdoches. They just muffed a punt and then threw a deep ball late in the game that got picked off. Those were its 2 mistakes.
Yeah, you were there. Had Nac not gotten off to that 14-0 start, it could have been in a completely different game.
Yeah.
Big starts are probably needed for both teams because White House, obviously a slow start last week against John Tyler, 38-10. Game was over before it really got going. And then Lufkin's got to come out stronger because, things are going to get a little tight on that sideline. if they're facing an early deficit again, knowing that, if they don't come with it, they're going to be 0-2 and maybe even 0-3 once next week comes around. Time to give our customary weekly shout-outs to our offensive and defensive players of the week. First up, we referenced him earlier in the show. Alto junior quarterback Keenan Johnson is our ETSN.fm Dairy Queen Offensive Player of the Week. Wow. Just crazy performance against Tenaha. Really, he's got great numbers through 4 games. But last week against Tenaha, obviously the big catalyst, 327 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. And to top that off, 140 yards passing and 2 more touchdowns. So that's, over 500 yards of total offense, or almost 500 yards of total offense, and then throw in 7 total touchdowns. You wonder how a team like Alto can put up 690 yards against Tenaha. Well, that's how.
Yeah, Keenan's production was pretty much an offensive unit's whole production in a game. It's really amazing to look at these numbers.
Yeah. And then Defensive Player of the Week, he's probably one of our best overall players in the region.
Yeah, someone that I think people know about a little bit now, and that's Jalen Lane from Nacogdoches, the defensive back in his first game as a safety, replacing Brandon Jones, who was lost for the season in the game prior with a torn PCL. He picked off Ennis. That was the interception we referenced earlier at the end of the game. And before that, he gave him a 14-0 lead on the muff kick recovery.
Right.
So he was responsible for the 2 teams' turnovers.
Right, and he got the party started, helped get him up 14-0, and then he ended the party. He turned the lights out on Lufkin with an interception late.
And his body of work this season's been good. Obviously, he's a big-time recruit, the number 1 player in all of East Texas in terms of scholarship numbers with 38 FBS offers, and he's an Oklahoma State commit.
Yep, so congratulations to Keenan Johnson of Alto and Jalen Lane of Nacogdoches, our offensive and defensive players of the week. That's going to about wrap it up for this week's edition of the podcast. Before you get out to your games on Friday night, be sure to log on to ETSN.fm, and we've got a bunch of previews already up on the website. We'll have more in the coming days. Don't forget to check out our weekly stat leaders that Mike Graham has been working feverishly on over the last several days. So much so that he slept through his alarm clock this afternoon. So, and that's right, I said this afternoon. So it's a lot of long hours, and we appreciate Mike's work for doing that. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, stats, that's the place to go. We've got a ton of players that are putting up huge numbers so far this season, so go check that out. And if you have any questions or comments for either one of us, you can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Clint Buckley, and Mike, you are
at Mike_ETSN.
All right, folks. Well, until we talk again next week, y'all have a great weekend watching some high school football.